After some excellent reporting on the race website by Jonathan Noble, representatives of the Mercedes and Red Bull powertrain power unit divisions are supposedly currently meeting, allegedly, probably a better word, the FIA to discuss a major loophole in the regulations which has now been exposed. And that is that the new compression ratio of the 2026 power units, don't forget that's 50% electrification now, but there's still an internal combustion engine in there somewhere. The compression ratio in the new regulations has been reduced from 18.1 to 16.1. But the suggestion on the race website is yet to be confirmed, of course, is that several, or at least two, power unit manufacturers have found an ingenious way of getting around what in theory is a power reduction. And that potentially is employing some key components with a super high coefficient of thermal efficiency or some kind of trick thermally activated mechanism which would artificially reduce the combustion chamber volume and thereby increase the compression ratio about to where it was. First conclusion there is that scrutineering in Australia should be a right old drama. This is nothing to do with a vernier caliper or a weighbridge or a yardstick. This is going to be very serious, complicated stuff. And at the moment, it appears that the two manufacturers involved are Mercedes, who basically do half the grid now, and Red Bull powertrains. I find it astonishing, got to say right here, that Honda are not involved in it as well, bearing in mind that basically Mercedes powertrain for a long time was Andy Carl, and Andy Carl is now at Aston Martin, i.e. at Honda. And that Adrian Newey, of course, is with Andy at Honda, but also was at Red Bull powertrain. So why wouldn't Andy and Adrian not be going down this path? Now, just pressing pause there, of course, there was a moment in 2009, back end of 2008, when Adrian Newey says he went to Charlie Whiting, then the FIA technical delegate, to say, what do you think about this idea we have for a double diffuser at the back of the car? And he says that Charlie said, don't even go near it, do not do this, it will be illegal. And so Adrian says they then therefore decided not to go ahead with it at Red Bull. However, Adrian also says that Ross Brawn subsequently went to Charlie, who gave Ross the nod to go ahead with the double diffuser. And we all know what happened there. Jenson Button went on to win the 2009 World Championship. Now, it could be that Adrian and Andy Cowell, super conservative with Honda at the start of this new era, have decided not to go down that path and maybe cause any sort of, or face any sort of political drama. I find that unlikely because an opportunity is an opportunity. And as I'm saying at the moment, this looks to be a grey area that's being exploited because the measurement of this new compression ratio of 16.1 in the regulations is supposedly at ambient temperature. Of course, ambient temperature, when you're talking about engine performance, is a massively grey area. And anybody would have known that setting a rule at ambient temperature would open a massive can of worms at operating conditions. And that's what's happened. Now, you could say typical FIA again. I'm not going to jump on that bandwagon because I actually feel very sorry for Nicholas Tombazis because he's been given this mandate to produce these unbelievably complicated regulations for 26 onwards, both on the power unit side, on the aero side, and on the chassis side. And he's got a very small team of people fighting, if you like, all the top engineering departments of all the Grand Prix teams. An impossible task, you got to say. And I don't believe this will be the first grey area that we're going to have in these regulations, albeit on the power unit side or the chassis or aero sides. This potentially is just the first of many. And we already have one drama already, effectively, and that is the withdrawal of Renault as an engine supplier. And as a result of Audi coming in, the MGUH, and that's the key point, the MGUH which has been just an integral part of the whole Formula One hybrid engine thing since 2014. The MGUH has now been discarded because Audi said they didn't want to be put at a disadvantage by having to incorporate it because they'd never had it on their endurance cars before. So Formula One said, we really want Audi, we'll get rid of MGUH. That can't be a positive thing in terms of where Formula One, in theory, want to go with hybrid technology. But putting that to one side, Formula One now has gone to 50% electrification, and it's great in many ways, I think, to see the internal combustion engine being the area on which some engineers are obviously focusing still to try to get an advantage. And I really hope that no action is taken. And if these engineers have been creative enough, or brave enough, if that's the right word, politically maybe, to go ahead and do this, and to have more power and effectively to recreate the 18.1 compression ratio which they lost in the regulations, then good luck to them. I think that's what Formula One is all about. And if Ferrari, Audi and Honda do not have it for political reasons or because they were not brave enough, then that is the way Formula One is. I suspect Formula One will try all they can to have parity of the engines, and they'll try to introduce some sort of regulation which clarifies what ambient temperature is, or try to limit the ways you can artificially reduce the combustion chamber volume. But that's going to be a very, very complicated thing. And I don't envy anyone at the FIA trying to get on top of this now. And it's all part of the ridiculous complication of the compromise Formula One has now found itself in. And that's because Formula One, when it had the opportunity to adopt its own, effectively its own Formula E category and create a Formula E category around electric cars, around the future, they didn't do it. They left it to Jean Todt to set up. And that was partly because Bernie and Jean Todt had fallen out over the Bahrain Grand Prix. But that's really what should have happened. Formula One should have kept its thoroughbred V8s, V10s, which were cheap, super reliable, and produced amazing noise and all the things that the fans loved. They should have kept that as a thoroughbred racing category. And then at the same time, developed an electric category alongside it, an academy, if you like, which took place every Grand Prix. The teams could have lent their technology to the Formula E teams. The drivers, some of the Formula One drivers could have done events as well in the old BMW Pro Car days like those. But they didn't do that. They just allowed the whole thing to become separate. And as a result, Formula One now, since 2014, has had to have this compromise existence. And it's been a big compromise up until now. And now it's going to get even bigger for 26 onwards from the power unit, the aerodynamics and the chassis side. So yeah, I do have sympathy for the FIA. The reality is, I think Formula One and the team owners are completely lost in terms of the compromises they have to make. Of course, they'll all put on a brave face and they'll all say, yeah, it's all going to be okay. It's all going to happen. We're going to have great overtaking. We're going to have this, we're going to have that. But the complication and the issues involved now, particularly if the regulations are changed and manufacturers like Mercedes and Red Bull powertrain with Ford are going to have to make changes to their power units at this very, very late stage, are just beyond belief, really. And that's part of the compromise. And this will be the first of many such technical arguments, I predict, which will all be expensive and costly. And also on top of that, I predict it's also going to be some sort of smokescreen for some other super clever ideas, which also fall under the heading of not in the spirit of the regulations, but technically within the regulations. If you've got something super clever, you might want to smokescreen it with something like this combustion chamber argument, which they know other manufacturers are looking at, to avoid anybody really looking at what they're going to be doing. That's another, maybe that's what Adrian's up to, letting them get on with that, and he's doing this. We'll see what happens.